Good evening and welcome to our latest Prague Space Security Guest Lecture. We're delighted that you could join us online today. My name is Jana Robinson and I'm Managing Director of the Prague Security Studies Institute. A key part of PSSI's mission is to identify and illuminate emerging threats to the transatlantic alliance and to like-minded partners worldwide, particularly in the economic and financial and space domains. With these space security guest lectures, we seek to feature experts and senior practitioners to explore the strategic, technological, and geopolitical forces shaping the space domain today. It is therefore a great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's lecture, Europe as a Space Power. We're delighted to be joined by Hermann Ludwig Moeller, a leading expert who has devoted more than 2 decades to European and international space policy. Since 2022, Mr. Moeller has served as director of the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna, where ESPI advances European space policy globally through independent analyses and strategic recommendations to European decision makers and institutions. Previously, he held senior leadership positions at the European Space Agency, working at the heart of Europe's civil space programs. Today's discussion comes at a particularly important moment, following the EU's Space Strategy for Security and Defense, the proposed EU Space Act, the European Defense Industrial Strategy, new national space strategies and investments, and the November 2025 Ministerial Council of the European Space Agency, questions about Europe's role, coherence, and weight as a global space power has taken on new urgency. This evening, Mr. Moeller will walk us through the key outcomes of the ESA Ministerial Council, explain how national investments are shaping Europe's space ambitions, and discuss what this means for Europe's competitiveness and its ability to act as a strong, unified space actor. Ludwig, welcome, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jana. Pleasure to be here. And let me try and get the system going on the presentation. You already introduced the key aspects of the presentation, and I will be happy to start the presentation. Is this visible to you? Not yet?
Yes, it's visible.
It's visible, perfect. And the layout is okay, so everybody can see the full information?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Jana. It's always a pleasure to team up, and we are regular guests in Prague and work together at the conference, and also you joining us in Vienna every now and then on different events, like recently on our annual conference of ESPI, which in fact was under the title of Europe as a Space Power. So very topic of the day. Let me introduce a little bit what I want to walk you through, because it's very multifaceted. And you, Jana, you refer to the European strategies, EU strategy, Space Act, industrial strategy, national strategies, which are increasingly relevant, very prominent now, France, Germany, also in terms of budgetary investments, and ESA ministerial just a few weeks back in November last year, the biggest ever subscription on European level so far. Before I start, a few words on ESPI in a nutshell. I will make it very brief, but just to give a background and where we fit. As you said, Jana, in the introduction, our main purpose is really to promote European space policy at international and global level. We provide the analysis you mentioned, and we also raise public awareness. So it is really on these three elements that our mandate is being defined. If you look into who we are, it's a team now of about 40 people united in Vienna. It's quite a portfolio, and you will see it also in the presentation, from international affairs to legal to science, engineering, business, economics. So it's really multidisciplinary. And if you look into what we actually work on in terms of content, it is across the whole range of space. So Today, we are centered on security and defense, but one may argue that the race to the moon is not disassociated from security concerns. Green and sustainable is an element in industry, finance, and regulatory frameworks. This is what we do as our daily bread in Vienna and put it into the debate. Now, who are the members? It is an interesting construction in the sense that it really gathers all European or almost all European space agencies and governmental actors. It's about, in budgetary terms, probably 80% of the public space budget is represented through these members, and we provide an independent platform between these. Founders is ESA and Austria, today 23, supported by an advisory council headed by the former Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg. And there is a family photo where you see all of us. And Jana, I think you are in that photo. This is people we collaborate with, our members, our advisors, and the team in itself recently at the Austrian Parliament. A quick glimpse on our advisors. It's relevant to see that we really have different disciplines. Financial Times, also media. We have the head of the German agency. We have Sinead O'Sullivan from Harvard Business School. I'm not going through all elements, but you see this is quite an important body. Now, this is really the ground from which we operate, and what I will present you now, most of this is publicly available on our website, so you are invited also in a follow-up to consult that information in detail. The starting point is really the vision that we published in 2023, a vision for Europe in 2040, which distinguishes really 3 levels on which we work. There's a lot of talk on space capabilities, the centerpiece here, which is satellites, rockets, which is things you can see. But the main purpose is really, if I may say, the foundations. This is industry, this is finance. I know this is also close to the heart of what Jana is doing, but then also primarily on top, really the policy impact into ministries, beyond space, and also into C-level boards of major companies and emerging industries. If you want to illustrate this one by one, this is really just an illustration on the capability side. You see hardware in space. This is what people often can relate to. People talk a lot about rockets, but I think there is more to it. And if you really look into what we need, at the end, it's about technology, microchips and systems. It's about independence in digital technologies and the likes. It's about finance. It's about innovation workforce. The big challenge today is the sector is growing, and in particular now in Europe, to also resource the system from the basis. If you go on the top level, it is really different sectors of policy and economy, can be transport, energy, digital, security and defense, all really relevant for what space can really enable. Now, Europe in space, and the emphasis today is Europe as a space power. To give you some indications, when you talk about space power, and at the end we'll come to the security and defense element, we did at the last European elections an analysis. Actually, we do this through data science and obviously added value through our researchers. We assessed what are in the manifestos of political parties, what are the elements brought forward, what is the context in which space appears, and those being energy or security, innovation and digital, institutional structure research, green, agriculture, transport, foreign policy, and the likes. And you see it here in the plot in the bottom left. And it's very interesting and remarkable. You see 2019 numbers and 2024 in blue and orange. And you see that it's economy first. And the competitiveness that also was underlined in the introduction is at the core, and this has not changed. So economy has been and still is the prime association that politicians will associate space with. What is remarkable is between 2019 and 24, and it's maybe not a surprise to you audience, the incredible rise in security and defense, which was really low in relevance when it came to space. I'm talking about Europe here, so it's not a global perspective, because in other world regions and the US and the likes, this has always been different. In Europe, this is new, and it's certainly the game changer of recent time. And you see here that it really has, it's an up front runner together with economy by now. Innovation and digital has also increased in importance. What is also interesting to note that green, which was a European priority for many years, Copernicus program as a successful example of this, is really not in the center of attention nowadays. What is also interesting to note is that space for space itself is not a topic. It's really space in the context of other elements. And if you go on the right hand bottom of the page, you see also the different technologies that are mentioned. And it may not be a surprise that artificial intelligence is number one. It jumped from a low level to a clearly leading one. Batteries, but then already you have space that is quite prominent in this. And it gives you an indication next to quantum, semiconductors, biotech, robotics, nuclear, that space has found its space, if you like, in the deep tech and transformative things. So this is visible on political level, and I repeat, security and defense as the change. And this was already 24. I think the contrast would even be stronger today, maybe be stronger than economy. A quick jump into how this translates into a year later into the ESA ministerial. And what we depict here is the GDP contribution per ESA country, and also the contribution per capita. And you see smaller countries like Belgium prominent, Italy, France, Spain. So if you really scale it into these terms, you have some of the smaller nations, like per capita is Luxembourg, that is leading. It's quite interesting. And if you translate this into over the years from 2016 over the ministerial conference 1922 to 25, you can see interesting development. You see that Germany has always been with the top, and maybe the top, but they really, again, at Siemens 25, increased further by a total of, they made 23% now of the total share. You see that France has been relatively decreasing, and you see developments like remarkable, for instance, the UK that went down when, in particular here, it's Spain that really is stepping up in space, and Spain is also a supporter of, in particular, not only, but a supporter only also of security and defense developments. There has been a development not so long ago on Spainsat Next Generation, a significant development, successful development in Spain, as an example. You also see Belgium, again here, quite prominently, and you see with the smaller contributors, maybe to underline two. One is Poland for its geographical position, and again, this is driven by security and defense, has been really tripling its share in ESA. And maybe even more interesting, Canada has almost multiplied their support by a factor of 4, their share into ESA. They have a particular membership status in ESA, not being European, but still being part and being on the table. So this gives you quite a good indication on the trends over time. Some are stable and some have a dynamic. It is, in general, a very strong positive dynamic. It has been the first ministerial conference, in fact, that basically achieved almost the full subscription of what has been asked, what was proposed by the executive. Typically, the subscription value would be around 92%, statistically speaking, on what has been requested in this case. I think it was above 99%, which is remarkable. Also, the overall figure is remarkable, and it's an all-time high on ESA level. It is a clear statement. I think maybe the most important message from that conference is that the multilateral mechanism within Europe between the different member states coming together to do joint programs, optional programs where they can team up depending also on their priorities, is extremely successful at a time when the complexity of the geopolitical landscape has not decreased and is a challenge. So that was an important signal that this mechanism is a mechanism of the time and still and continues to be, and I believe will accelerate to be a mechanism that brings European actors and nations together. So overall, an extremely positive ESA ministerial conference. This is just a glance, and I do not intend to go through all the details of it, on the different actors and the governance within the system. One thing that it certainly tells you, you have a multitude of actors. You have the European Defence Agency in the system. I think they will increase in importance. We just did an exercise with them aside the Brussels conference last week, and I'll come back to this. The European Parliament, I just mentioned the election results from 2024. The European Commission as a key actor, External Action Service, EUSPA as the operational branch, and ESA. So this is quite a complex setup. We just issued a field guide. It's in fact online available. You can consult it on our website. And that explains really the functioning of this European governance structure. And I would recommend this as a background reading, very, very pertinent. So with this, say, brief introduction on the bigger picture, I would like maybe as we go along to zoom into a number of individual aspects. And this will be now shining the light on some of the aspects of a wider picture. And before I go into any detail, would like to make one statement that today we see three areas of strong development that happen at the same time, that are distinct, but at the same time interrelated. We see a new race to the moon and a challenge between China and the US on a landing, I would predict 2029. This will be very interesting to watch, and we know that Artemis 2 is about to launch and will be a major milestone on the transatlantic side. Next to the exploration side, there is security and defense, and I already said this is the game changer. And Germany, as an example, I mentioned it briefly before, announced an investment of 35 billion euros over the next 5 years into security and defense. This is on top of the figures you saw on the ESA ministerial. It is also roughly the equivalent of the total of ESA's budget, to give you an indication of the magnitude of the investment of a single European nation that by this investment is about to become a leader, and maybe the leader on these developments on space in Europe. And the third element, after exploration, and let's call it the race to the moon, after security and defense, is the economy part, which I underlined already. And this is, I would phrase this as the digital economy. This is what we see now happening, not only with Starlink and internet connectivity. There is a major shift in the system, enormous developments, investments, private investments that also will shape space, that might become, in fact, also a driving force, if not the driving force. So the triangle between exploration, moon, between security and defense, and between digital. This is really what will define anybody who wants to be a space power in the future. We are convinced, this is what we advocate, you have to exist on all three to be a true space power. Now, we have issued an analysis on space power in an attempt to quantify, to measure space power. It's a total of 69 KPIs in different fields, and they look into aspects of how autonomous are you and what capability and capacities do you hold in your hands. Autonomy means also that you actually can decide on their use. It's not simply of buying a service, but you have maybe the technology to be independent and have autonomy, but also in the operation and actual use of systems and services. And if you look at these two axes and you plot them in a two-dimensional space, it won't come as a surprise that the US, China, also Russia, in different degrees are considered space power by our measurements. In terms of capacity, US clearly up front. In terms of autonomy, China rated here higher than the US. Maybe an interesting remark. One of the parameters that we put in this equation is to which degree you may be dependent on industrial actors or commercial actors. And there may be a trade-off to be made between political decision-making and business interest of large-scale entrepreneurs. And that is something that is one contributor for the US not being rated even higher as they are already, just as one illustration. You see in this slot that we do not consider Europe today as a space power. It does not have the autonomy level and also not the capacity level. Certainly we work towards shifting Europe into the top right domain, and we will see how the coming years will translate into this, 2025. Also, the budgetary figures I provided to you before have been an excellent indication. They're certainly driven by security and defense. And to an extent that a year ago, 2 years ago, that pretty much would have been unimaginable. So we see certainly an enormous impulse between declaration of intent to actual political will and financing. Now, there are many ways to measure this, and this is one example here on the right-hand side of the plot. Foreign policy, defense, and security, and looking into how the different actors are actually leveraging space. And you see again that Europe here, when it comes to foreign policy, but in particular when it comes to defense and security, is certainly underutilizing space and space diplomacy to higher objectives. And you have a comparison here across the system. You see that Russia is ranking relatively high. Israel in aspects of defense and security is ranking very high, obviously next to the US and China. Now, our autumn conference of later last year, as I anticipated, was under the title of Europe as a Space Power. It was our biggest gathering to date on any of our previous conferences. We had, as you see here, quite a significant participation. We had 60 nations in the room, more than 300 participants. We had all world regions, speakers from parliament, government, space agency. And the narrative was to build power and to work towards a stronger Europe. To do this in order to also then build bridges. This is why there was a strong international participation. And an analysis, what really defines space power, what are the pillars? And I mentioned the three before: digital, exploration, security, and defense. Now, just the day before that conference, there was a very interesting conference on a European initiative, which is maybe the most prominent to watch out for the coming period. It was part also then subsequently of the ESA ministerial conference, an initiative on space for European resilience, which is really bringing together Earth observation capabilities, secure communication and navigation technologies in one interworking system. with a European component, but also interoperation and federation of national component. This is a true game-changing initiative, I would dare to say, where it is not about the building of one homogeneous, unified single system, as we know it from, for instance, Galileo, and in a different way from Copernicus. This is really a system of system, and the subscription to this program remain open also during this year. And I would expect more financing coming in. So this is a space to watch. Short form for the initiative is ERS, and it is with national systems, and it is also together with the European Commission. You see here also the Commissioner Kubilius next to the DG of ESA, Josef Aschbacher. Now, let's jump to policy impact. And a lot of what we have said is on, I would argue, sometimes too much within a space bubble. Many people that are used to talk space, and sometimes we lack the link of space into policy. I say this as a Space Policy Institute, where the linkage between space and policy is at the core. So we measure ourselves also on policy impact. And I give you an example here. It is complementary to what I said so far on the security side. This is really something that is more on the Earth observation element. It's more on the civilian side of things. But we really brought together actors. It was at the end at the Royal Society in London, pretty much mostly from outside the space sector, to really debate what is the value of space to them. And when we initiated this initiative, most of the people that we invited, and that was high level, like members of parliament and different foundations, really beyond the space parameter. Initially, they did not understand why they would be in such a debate. And I think they discovered space through this. And this is a nice example, which we want to replicate in other domains, to really bring space into a wider debate and part of the policy, of the cycle of policy making. Those are examples where space may actually, and in that case, Earth observation, help these sectors, for instance, in energy for safety and resilience of critical energy infrastructure, or monitoring gas and oil pipelines. There are many examples that can be listed. Also on food and water, on, for instance, monitoring of refugee camps. And you see automatically that very quickly you come into something that ultimately is dual use. So it may not be really originating from the context of security and defense, but you see there is relevant information that also in situations of conflict or consequences of conflict, crisis management are valuable. And I think it's almost a task of a decade to bring space into the policy debate in the different sectors. There are further examples here. I will maybe not go into each of them, but digital transition, climate resilience, emergency management, disaster management, humanitarian aid, disaster preparedness. This is really very rich, and Earth observation is, I think, is still at the beginning of also working into this value chain. Peace and security documenting of war crimes. You see, there's a very wide portfolio on where also Earth observation and originally civilian developments become de facto dual use and play a role also in security and defense. Now that brings you to that topic in itself as another spotlight. And here to illustrate, as a think tank, we try to be ahead of the curve, and we had our annual conference in 2024 under the topic of security and defense. And this was before the true and full momentum happened during 2025, and certainly now makes the headlines. And you see again here, we had quite a good participation. We had also military participants, and in fact co-organized with that conference. We had our first Space Command Roundtable. It is really a gathering of, in that case, it was Austria, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Spain, space commanders or representatives of ministries of defense to come together and discuss security and defense in a setting that is outside the normal governance. It's a successful model. We have replicated it again this year, and this is going to continue. Just to highlight on a few of the key findings here, it is a key message. It is a challenge, in fact, also to make sure that we really do justice, that security and defense doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is linked to the economy and to the competitiveness of the actors. The US has published 2 strategies in recent time on the integration of commercial solutions. I think to leverage them for security and defense is key. And it's certainly going to be a challenge to do the 2 things in best synergy, to develop respond to governmental needs, at the same time to develop a competitive industry. The establishment of military space units is considered a necessity. In the US, this is already a reality. In Europe, it has happened over the years, and it's continue to do so. And these findings, again, the key takeaways of this roundtable, this is a public version, and they can be consulted on our website. This is the second roundtable, which happened recently. Speed is of essence. This is one of the key takeaways. We need to find a way to ingest innovation that happens at a high pace, also in defense, that I would argue traditionally is not a procurement ecosystem that is defined by agility and speed. Now, this is going to be a challenge to find really approaches where the dynamics of entrepreneurs and commercial undertakings can be put to best use also for security actors. There are a few other points here which I do not plan to go into. These slides will be available, and we are also available to be consulted if there is interest on specifics on it. It is a very successful model, as I said, and it is interesting to see that also the military actors and space commands in Europe come together and share a debate in this forum. This is very fresh from the press. This is really just 2 weeks back, January 26th in Brussels. We had the annual European Space Conference, which is always held in the EU framework, if you like. And in conjunction with this, we organized a format for NAFWA dialogue. This was hosted by the European Defense Agency. It was developed in cooperation with the Austrian Ministry of Defense to bridge national approaches and to address GNSS disruptions during operations. You may well know that this is a challenge these times. Again, we had multiple countries represented: Austria, Belgium, Finland, Germany, Italy, Poland, Netherlands, Switzerland. The configuration changes sometimes slightly. That is more a matter of people being available. But for instance, France has also been very prominent. They were not directly involved here, but this format of roundtables of space commands or specific simulations is something that is something we have developed over the last 2 years, and it's going to be with us and develop further. So with this, I jump to another of the triangle that I introduced before, after security and defense, to exploration, and to what we term here as a race to the moon. This is really one of the big things to watch. You see Artemis 2 here on the left-hand side, crewed flight to lunar orbit, and then Artemis 3, first crewed lunar landing. And the timelines are very aggressive. You see the Chinese timelines, and verbally there has been reference to before 2030. These things, I would argue, are not easy to predict because they are high risk. There can be contingency situations that may alter plans significantly on either side of the coin here. But this is one element really that define the future of space, and it's a relevant race. I can add here that Europe is present together with the US and NASA on the service module on Orion. But one of the questions that Europe will have to answer, this is something that today is in the open, is really to develop own capabilities and ambitions beyond being a junior partner. It is early to really anticipate what the development will be, but there is momentum. If you look at the German national space strategy, security space strategy, there is reference to launches that should be able to also reach lunar orbits. I think that is significant. At the European Space Conference last week, there were several high-level statements, including by France, that Europe should have an ambition to have own boots on the moon. So this is another interesting space to watch. And this is really a recommendation that we issued. We made some analysis. If Europe wants to scale up its ambition in space exploration, there certainly is a window of opportunity right now. And I think it would be to the benefit of everybody, because with own capabilities, I think the ability to partner and maybe also to partner in a more equal manner is something that is an asset, not only for Europe, but also for international partnership. Again, this information is available online in one of the reports we issued on the topic. Now I come to the third pillar, and again, it's not really, it cannot be separated from the question on security and defense and space power, which we, in a simplified word here, basically only term digital. And if you look into what has hit the press in recent weeks, I should say, is, and that's one example, after Internet in Space and Starlink and Kuiper and Amazon being deploying, the attention has shifted to data centers in space. And you see different actors that are active in this already in space, cloud computing, in supporting infrastructure, in remote storage. It's quite an ecosystem in the making. We did a detailed analysis of this already. We started this a year ago. I believe it's, again, an example of, as a think tank, to try and be ahead of the curve. So before it hit the press, we had invested a year of work together, in that case with the Technical University of Munich, to look into this in a more complete and comprehensive way. I believe, as a whole, this is the most underestimated aspect of the future of space. Security and defense across the ocean, but now also in Europe, is in the headlines. It is certainly today driving the investments. It has overall globally surpassed the civilian budget, so the military budgets are becoming dominant. The race to the moon is evident, and it is unfolding in front of our eyes. I think what is less evident to capture is really the digital side of it. And I was in Davos, this is 2 weeks back, and it was an interesting statement by somebody knowledgeable and experienced that said that the concern may not be so much on political cycles and decision making, which may be cyclic, in fact, but what we observe today, that billionaires with enormous entrepreneurship and financial power and vision, they really invest strategically and at biggest scale into space. And this could really become a key driver that can raise also questions of political autonomy, because we are talking about business plans that may have also their own priorities. And we see, there is the announcement here of the merge of SpaceX and XAI in preparation of the upcoming IPO of SpaceX. There have been announcements or indications of data center networks in space reaching 1 million satellites deployed by Starship. I think we are seeing a period now where space is really scaling up, and we could live a period where internet to a good extent is moving into space. And if you go back 25 years, there was no internet. And today you cannot imagine our economy and society without it. It is a valid question to be asked the same, if the same could happen to a considerable extent also in space. And if it did, I believe it would become the driving force, and it would challenge, and we'll have to see the synergies with the other two components, security and defense and exploration. A quick word on the industry, and we talked about from the beginning on the importance of competitiveness, and at the end, you need industry and you need innovation to actually put things into orbit and develop the benefits of space. Again, this is a European perspective, and as you are well aware, today in Europe, we do not have those large-scale actors as you have them across the ocean. And this is one of the questions today, how the space ecosystem on the industrial side will develop further. You may be aware there are talks about mergers between the large-scale integrators of Europe, which I would call a horizontal integration in terms of improving the efficiency of manufacturing, be more cost-effective, for instance, in a situation where you may argue a lot of integration today happens vertically, meaning you equip yourself with a launch capability, you develop satellites, and you develop the services that go with it. So it's an interesting comparison to see how what's happening in Europe today compares to what is happening elsewhere. An interesting example in this is also that this is not only about the space industry and how they may merge or team up between themselves to gain speed, to scale up, to develop the skill, and ideally also to develop a common vision. It is also a question, and it's a separate report we did, and I would highly recommend this one, a question on reconvergence of Europe's space and defense industry. And one example, a prominent example, is Rheinmetall in Germany. They were not engaged in space, and today they have been entering into agreements and corporations for mass production of satellite system, teaming up with new space actors. And this is maybe also a growth path to look into how space becomes part of the bigger industrial ecosystem of defense as one element. Ultimately, defense contractors, they look for data and information as the flow into their stakeholders, into the battlefield. And evidently, space has become and will increasingly become a source of data and information. So it's a natural extension. It will be another space to watch and see how this will develop over time. And we have some interesting data. Here's just one illustration. If you look at the different defense actors that are depicted in this bubble diagram in dark blue, you see the one I mentioned already, Rheinmetall teaming up with several actors. You have Dassault, you have BAE Systems, Kongsberg, Indra, Safran, Leonardo, Saab, Therma. So you see that these are really coming together. And if you look into the number of agreements over the years, this has stepped up significantly in the last 2-3 years, and it is not really a surprise. So another example that you cannot dissociate in that case different parts of industry, and space again here is part of a wider ecosystem, and space compared to defense and space compared to digital actors is relatively small. So that will be an interesting development to monitor. Finance. Now, at the end, I come back to the initial slide on the policy vision, the capability development, and the foundations, the hourglass, as we call it. So the finance is one key element of anything you want to do, whether it is space or other undertakings. And certainly when it comes to a domain like space and deep tech, you need financing that understands the sector. And although 85% of funding into space today globally in approximation are publicly driven, the private part is increasing, and the private part, to a good extent, is at the core of changing the game of space. Now, we do a monitor on space investments. Again, this is something available. We, in fact, also have a dashboard where you can play with these numbers. So it has our database in the background. It's a global database. We work with other partners across the planet to obtain these data. And it is quite interesting to see how this has developed over the past years. There was a peak in 2021 that was due to a financing instrument at the time that was prominent. So it is maybe in an anomaly. What you see is that there is a good share of financing on the private side, but and this is global figures. Yeah, you see the regions on the top left: Europe, China, US, the rest of the world, a number of deals, and you see that the share of Europe is relatively okay in proportion to other regions. But what is striking is, for instance, the Chinese part has increased quite significantly here. The US part, in fact, in that particular year, has been lower. And there is more data in the system. This excludes investments normally like OneWeb and the likes. This is more focused on financing rounds, scaling up with venture capital. But it's interesting to monitor over time, and also the composition across world regions. Now, coming to the end of the tour on looking into the different aspects of what space defines and where it is part of space power and where it may be relevant also for security and defense. Space as an asset is a working title, which we use to capture really what is the regulatory framework, for instance, that tries to improve competitiveness, but maybe also common standards and the likes. And prominently has been the EU Space Act that has been discussed. There is still a discussion ongoing on how much it is something that could be an obstacle, and it is perceived by some industries as an obstacle for competitiveness, because compliance with the act would require investments. There is a cost of compliancy that, in particular for an emerging space industrial ecosystem, like now in Europe, could be a burden. So this is an ongoing discussion. I would not dare to predict where the sweet spot will be in the Space Act in its final version, but there's certainly a balance to be found. Now, this is really now the road to, if you put it on the time scale, you see that there is a mechanism for these acts. You see this, there's a committee vote at each committee in early 26. And then there is a whole process of trilogue between Parliament, Council, and Commission. This is the standard process of the operation of the European Union institutions. It is, as I mentioned before, described in more detail in the field guide we just issued on governance of European space. And you see that it would really come into implementation more in the time frame of 2030 and maybe 2030 onwards, which is also a point of concern because it will be relatively late, and some world regions may have deployed already constellations when Europe is still developing, and it is not so evident to find the right timing and to make this most effectful. Now, with this, I come to conclude this first hour of presentation, and we will invite Q&A in a moment. Maybe a quick outlook on where we think we are heading, or what are the topics to watch for 2026. Again, this is from a European perspective. It's an outlook on the year to come. Again, it is something that we also published in as part of our normal activity. So basically, we define this in 7 distinct points. The first one is really in the geopolitical disruptions we are experiencing globally. We see clearly a window of opportunity for Europe for international leadership and partnership that can translate into large-scale space partnerships with concrete programmatic goals and joint political and financial backing. I think what we see now in European nations on EU level has the substance to also team up across beyond EU borders and Europe. And as part of this, also a crafting and owning a long-term posture towards a full-fledged space power. If you go back to the depiction of the space power matrix that I showed initially, we should use the time ahead with a very good start in 25 with the unprecedented funding levels in Germany on ESA level and elsewhere. I think this is a time to draft this long-term path towards space power. Second point, the trump card outscaling Europe, and as made reference to the challenge of commercialization in digital, and I don't need to repeat it here. This is undertakings of in the order of 10 billion and maybe up to 100 billion investments into new space endeavors. This is at a level that can outscale what Europe is scaling up to today. So it is certainly a reference to watch out for. Secondly, there is bigger investments already in exploration, and the question for Europe to also develop own capabilities and go beyond the junior partner, it will be essential to remain relevant in comparison to what is invested in the US, in China, in India, and also other regions. And then security and defense and developments like the Golden Dome. There is talk now also in the German security space strategy as an example of a shield and a sword. So missile defense systems, but also the capability to act in space. So if you look at the developments of the size of a Golden Dome, if it materializes, those are of an order of magnitude that are significant, and they could outscale European efforts. And this could happen on one or several of these 3 headings that, again, they define what I introduced before, the key pillars of the space power. Number 3, the continuing security and defense momentum. This has really carried the year 2025. I think there are chances and certainly a clear expectation that this momentum continues. It may also amplify further. Poland, as you may have seen in the investment curves of the ESA ministerial meeting, has been stepping up already. They could be a candidate to further develop. They may also develop some capabilities in the country to work on European institutional level. So this is something that could amplify this dynamic further. Same with Spain potentially, that has been very strong at the ministerial and may be strong also on the increasingly strong on the national efforts. The question is how the UK will develop in the European setting, but the year 26 will be instrumental to see to which extent this momentum will not only be maintained, because I'm sure it will, but maybe further amplified. And we may get into a situation then also in Europe, and we are about to get there, that this investment for security and defense could outscale the civilian space budget, which would be a significant move. Number 4, pragmatic models of European cooperation. There have been many talks over many years to find the best solution or unified solution for all European actors. I think we today are in a situation where time is of essence, agility is of essence, and it has become clear also at the Brussels Space Conference last week that with the presence of several ministers, national ministers next to EU commissioners, that different actors on European and national level will bring capabilities to the table, which I believe is a positive signal. There will be a challenge to make these developments talk to each other, interoperate, to get into infrastructures and services of pooling and sharing that can be system level, that can be data and information level, into a federation of systems. I think this inherently has the benefit of increasing the resilience, because you have different parts of a system that may be complementary or sometimes an overlap, and you don't have a single point of failure in the system. It's not a centralized system. So these pragmatic models of Europe coming together will be key, and I think they will de facto happen. Number 5, a new European industrial vision and policy. You see what we presented earlier, the question on what mergers or acquisitions will we see, how will we increase the competitiveness? Will we see that some space companies will be scaling with non-traditional space actors? I think I see the potential for this to happen on both sides, on the defense side, the space and defense teaming up industrially, but also on the digital side. So that can be mobile phone operators teaming up with space operators. You may be aware that has been a major procurement on direct-to-device frequencies. So we will see certainly a moment when space will hyperscale into consumer sectors, into your mobile phones. And then the question is going to be the terrestrial operators that will acquire or merge in one way or the other, or cooperate with space segment operators, or whether the space segment may actually play that acquisition in the other direction. Very interesting to watch how this will evolve on a European scale. Then number 6, digital space as a transformative driver. We will see if we have cutting-edge innovation and technology stepping forward. Quantum key distribution is an element as one example, but I think there is really a beginning of what can happen in terms of digital space beyond the pure connectivity. I think we will find interconnected computing systems, storage systems in space, not so different from what we know from the internet today on Earth. And last but not least, in all these different aspects, the question, will in 2026 Europe succeed to find what we term here its North Star, to really have a common vision for space with all the diversity of contributing elements and maybe different strategies with different European or national priorities in some cases, to still find a leadership towards a common vision. I, again, would not call this a unified approach. I think this is really coming together to best effect. And then ultimately communicating and developing the transformative value of space across its economic security and also its societal dimension. And maybe this is a nice way to conclude this introduction to the topic. The awareness rising into society on something that is increasingly complex and difficult to understand for people in the street when they see the importance of space in the war in Ukraine, when they may, in the meantime, all be familiar with Elon Musk and internet from the sky, and when they see in the not too far future humans being back on the moon. There is a major dimension here to also communicate this into civil society, to make them aware, to also mitigate concerns that may exist. So this is part of the bigger ambition. And with this roundup and what to watch in 2026, I would conclude this introductory session, and I would be happy to take any questions. I understand that Jana, you may be helping in the moderation of those questions.
Yes, thank you, Ludwig. Thanks so much for this very comprehensive overview. And if anyone has any questions, please do use the chat or use the Q&A button. So we have about 10 minutes for a question. We usually run the lectures for an hour, but I think we can definitely extend to an hour and 15 minutes because it's such a huge topic, and I really appreciated the overview and the pillars, especially. They're very, very interesting. Maybe this brings me, I can maybe kick off with one question. Is you mentioned in your outlook that Europe should be looking for pragmatic models of cooperation. And I guess it is also linked a little bit to the question of how does Europe envision its strategic autonomy and what should be the model for that. So how would you see it in practical terms today, and where do you see the biggest gaps? So for example, do you see Europe actually getting closer to acting as a single space actor, for example, more coordination between EU, ESA, or is it still best understood as a collection of like-minded national space powers? For example, you mentioned the Germany's large national budget now. So how do you, for non-Europeans, how should they understand all this?
Yes, I think I would have a clear answer on this. I think the times of just being a collection of pieces, I think those times are gone. We are no longer in that time. That does not mean that tomorrow we will have the perfect unified system, and I'm always very careful on using the word unified. But I think what we will see, and I'm deeply convinced that this is what we will see some actors going faster than others. We will see that elements will come to the table, and that can be satellite constellations for Earth observation or for communication and the likes, that are ready to interoperate, to interconnect. The question is, and that was a point of debate also in Brussels last week when I was, amongst other things, moderating the head of agencies panel with France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. Who is actually driving this? Is this being driven from the European end, so European standard, that is applied across the nations, or is this coming from from national developments? I think we will also here see the two, but I believe that it will be a matter of scale and speed. And if there are significant developments that will become drivers early on, they, in my opinion, will develop into aggregators. And you will see aggregation across regions and increasingly across Europe. A good example are the Scandinavian countries that are joining forces already in some activities when it comes to SAR data systems, where they team up and they may jointly support common industrial solutions. So there will be a lot of players, some of which will be at scale and speed to really give the momentum and act as aggregators. This is very different from the past. I think it's a matter of scale, really, of substance on the table. And one element on European level should be Iris Square, and we hope this is going to be used to the maximum extent. But what Germany will produce and maybe other nations will be significant.
Very interesting. Thank you. I was just, we have two questions from the audience, and they both are mentioning China. So one is was very specific and talking about how the proposed EU Space Act could proactively counter China. And the other question is a little bit of opposite. So given the uncertainty in the transatlantic relations, the question is it realistic to expect Europe to gradually shift its space partnerships toward what they call balance model? So where would China stand in here? And maybe I could also link it to the question of what you mentioned about the private sector and industry, which is playing a new role, right? So how when we have the new phase in which the commercial innovators, not the states alone, define the strategic advantage. So caught between potentially the US commercial scale and China's state-driven space model, what must Europe do to stay competitive and resilient in this new space race?
Yes, very good questions and very deep. First, I should say, I'm certainly not in a position to have a clear and definite answer on a question of this magnitude. I should also say that we are an independent institute, and everything that I can say on these questions is really, it's the reading of a European independent think tank to the topic. And it is also a reading as the world happens. So we're not talking about a steady state situation, which makes a true and definite answer, I would argue, impossible for anybody. First of all, I don't think it's a China question. It is really a question of diversification of partnerships. And I would not see today China being part or anywhere central in this equation. I don't see this happening. Whatever I think we see already happening is that we've seen, I mentioned it, Canada stepped up in ESA by a factor of 4. There are talks with Australia maybe to join in a similar framework. There is European Space Agency just opened an office in Japan. What you'll see, there are talks on space exploration with India. So what you will see is a diversification of partnerships. And I think this is really a momentum of the next few years where we will see evidence of this happening. I do not believe that in this dynamic you will see China prominently anytime soon, if at all. In fact, part of the dynamic is also to have maybe alternative offers. So it is not just defined by a bipolar consideration. It is really to really increasingly work between middle powers, if you want to call them this way. The second part of the question on the US commercial scale, Also here, I don't think this is, again, it's not just a question for Europe, it's a question for the US themselves, I would argue. You can find yourself in a situation where the commercial forces are so strong that there is a true question on um, where is the political power in this? And there is a high concentration of investment and capital that is happening, and the scale of what we see is tremendous. Again, it is too early to really say how this will pan out. I also have difficulties to imagine this will really happen this way. But it was a remark in Davos, and when the remark came, I thought this is a true point to consider in our reflections. So we are in a situation where there is a concentration of financial power and also capabilities in orbit. They are privately owned, they are privately financed. Um, and there is a true question to ask every policy actor in space how to deal with that. So I would disassociate this from China, certainly.
So to moving on, I wanted to ask maybe one of the last question is this: you mentioned the moon and the cislunar space, which is a very, very interesting space to watch right now. And I know that you mentioned it's not yet clear what European role might be as we move forward, but what do you envision as some kind of specific role alongside the US and our Asian partners, for example, in the what should be the Europe's priorities in this emerging cislunar ecosystem and making sure that we govern in an open and transparent way as well?
Yes. I go back, is it 3 years now that the French President Macron, he initiated the question on should Europe have own human spaceflight capability. And last week at the Brussels conference, it was again a French minister who made explicit reference to an ambition of European boots on the moon. So this question has resurfaced. It has been there for the past few years. In my opinion, it was overshadowed for a period of time by the situation on the launcher side, which took a lot of priority and attention in Europe. But the question is back on the table, whether there is room for also a new endeavor on human exploration. In the past, this is where it never got to the point to develop beyond the junior partner, and that was certainly because there was not a clear political mandate, maybe also not the geopolitical context, that there was not the budget on the table. If you take Germany and the 35 billion for security and defense, it's an excellent example that things can happen, but you need somebody to make them happen. But a year ago, what we have seen now in Europe was unimaginable. And I hope that a year from now, I can say the same for 2026.
Thank you. Well, we have a last question here, I think, for today, which is very specific. It's asking about ESA and Australia moving toward a formal treaty level cooperative agreement. And I guess this brings us to the question of what you talked about, diversification of partnerships. And again, do you see European Space Agency as playing a major role here? Or would it be, for example, side by side with other actors as they move forward? So I guess this specific question brings us to the bigger topic of diversification of the partnerships.
Well, first, I should say that I cannot speak for the European Space Agency. So again, it's an ESPI commentary, if you like. Secondly, I also do not have the insight to give a true valuable answer to this specific case, and I don't want to speculate. So if I can answer in more general terms, and I think I've said it, I'm pretty convinced, I'm very convinced that we will see this diversification and we will see new partnerships across European borders. I would expect that this will also happen, and maybe primarily happen still on agency to agency cooperation. So this can happen with Australia. It can happen also with other actors, and there are a few that are candidates for this. It is certainly something that in the past external observers may have thought to have Canada in the framework of ESA is very exotic, and why is Canada there? Now, today we are in a situation where this is no longer so exotic as an idea. And Europe is trained, and do not forget, Europe is trained and maybe the best trained on the planet to work in the complexity of dealing with different actors and to work to best effect in a federation. And we do this in Europe. It's not easy. I think it's a training we can also apply across the borders of Europe. I think it's an asset.
Excellent. I agree with that statement for sure. Well, Ludwig, many thanks again for a clear
Pleasure.
and timely insights. They have given us a lot to reflect on. And on behalf of the Prague Security Studies Institute, thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. And I look forward to continuing this conversation at future PSSI events. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.